Colonialism, in my opinion, is the erasure of Native and Indigenous people. It is the oppression of one group, the European group of people that came to this country, went to this land, looking to relieve themselves or flee from their own oppression by oppressing those who they came in contact with.
Tonight's conversation about colonialism, enslavement, and the arts is inspired by national observances of the 400th anniversary of the beginning of North American slavery. This conversation tonight is one of many happening in Boston alone, and I don't imagine it will be the last conversation we have here at the museum. We will not cover everything in this 1-hour conversation, and we encourage you to seek out and participate in other programs and conversations related to colonialism and enslavement, past and present. With that, we'll transition into tonight's conversation, which will be curated by Sadada Jackson.
I want to start in the way that I always begin when I have the honor to speak, to share, to teach, and to orient us to the first body in the place that we're in today, which is this land. We're in the land of the Algonquin-speaking people, the territory of the Massachusetts. I want to also acknowledge their kin who've fished here, who've lived here, who've also died here, the Nipmuc, the Wampanoag, and those named and not named. I want to extend a deep gratitude and thanksgiving to my Black enslaved ancestors, whose life and labor made possible the institutions and the infrastructures that we benefit from. So we'll get started with introductions. Panelists, if you can just introduce yourself by name, your pronouns, and any other identifying markers that we need to know about you, including your place and lands in which you come from. So, Michael, you want to start?
Sure. The privilege of sitting next to the moderator, right? My name is Michael Bobbitt. I am the artistic director at New Repertory Theater and a very recent new transplant to Boston. I moved here at the end of July. I was born in Washington, D.C., and he series is my preferred pronouns. And just a little thing to know about me is that I have a child that I adopted when he was eight months old from Vietnam, and he just went off to start his freshman year of college at the University of Florida. So that's a little tidbit about me.
Congratulations.
Kwe, Watasuis Katusipu. I am a Wampanoag, and I just said to you hello. My name is Talking Water. That's my Wampanoag name. My Christian name is Deborah Spears Moorehead, she. I'm married. I've been married for 37 years. I have 3 children, first grandchild. So that's finally to get the grandchild. I was worried a little while there. So I'm a descendant of Massasoit, and for us, it's a year that's very significant because it's 400 years since my ancestor welcomed the people from across the water. I am an artist. I paint the Eastern Woodland Native people, and I wrote a book about what happened to us since Massasoit met us. I met the Pilgrims. And let's see, what else? I think that's about, I do a lot of murals. I just finished a mural in Providence called the Land Acknowledgement Indigenous People We Are Here mural. And I've been doing murals for years. And I'm also, besides being Wampanoag, I'm Nipmuc, and I'm Cherokee, and I'm Mohawk, and I'm Pequot. Because we pretty much, my ancestors pretty much married the Eastern Woodland. We tried to keep that royal blood at any cost. So I'm married to a Irish Iroquois, because I was told never to marry in Eastern Woodland because I was related to them all.
Good evening. My name is Jenny Oliver, and I use the She series. I am a choreographer here in the city. I am also of the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog. What else would I like to say? As a choreographer, I try to create works that center our perspectives, meaning indigenous perspectives, on contemporary issues. So I'm not only speaking about what has happened only 400 years ago, but I'm also thinking about what's happening today and how do the work that we're making intersect with those narratives and allow the general public to really start to understand and see that we are here. We have always been here, that we are representative of our ancestors, and that I am a descendant of those people, and reclaiming those narratives and those perspectives of my ancestors is really important to me, even in a contemporary time such as 2019. I also am Cape Verdean. I also have Wampanoag heritage, although I am not of that tribe. If you know anything about being an indigenous person, especially in this country, you cannot have affiliations with more than one tribe. So that is a challenge in itself, and I think that it's quite timely that we're having this conversation to speak about colonialism, and then we also have to think about what does that mean for our indigenous people that are forced to choose who we are and what we represent. So I'm happy to be here. I am a little bit nervous, but I'm gonna breathe and I'll be okay.
Thank you. So my name is Sadada. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, they and them. I am a Black Nipmuc woman from the Natick Band. I'm from the Algonquin speaking lands of a place that we call Boston, and I was born here. And my role tonight will be primarily as a curator of this conversation, and to some extent your moderator. So my question tonight, to kind of start us off, my extension question is, what is the role of art, artists, and culture institutions in confronting and moving away from colonialism and towards a restoration of a true legacy of Native American people, Black people, African descendant people, Afro-Caribbean people here in the Americas, as well as other cultural identities that have been stolen, buried, banished by white privilege and white power. So we'll go to our first set of questions. So this is about the artists as descendants of indigenous and Black peoples. So in late August 1619, an English purveyor ship, the White Lion, landed on Powhatan land in what the colonial settlers called Jamestown, Virginia, with 20 enslaved Angolans. The English took the 20 enslaved Angolans from a ship that was en route to the Spanish colony Veracruz and sold them to Yardley and Presley of Jamestown, a colonial settlement established on Powhatan land in 1607. Now, on the face of this moment, it provides us a glimpse on how settler colonialism, slavery, American capitalism converge to commence this long, heinous history of American oppression and Black enslaved Africans as well as indigenous bodies. With this historical glimpse back, we understand that this moment was created by a set of causes and conditions that supported a worldview of dominance, white body supremacy, to use Reshma Manikim's word, and related violences. We also know that the legacy of moments like this, the sale of the 20 enslaved Angolans, is what was called Jamestown, Virginia in 1619, remains at the center of America's worldviews, values, institutions, and relationships. So before we dive into this history and the frameworks and institutions, I thought that we would start just with some basic understandings of these terms and concepts. So my questions to you are, what does colonialism mean to you? What forms has it taken and still takes for you and or your kin? Here, kin refers really to those that you are in relationship with through blood, race, ethnic, or tribal group, gender, sexual identity, or other identities, and so on. And finally, what, if anything, do you want to say about the history of enslavement on people from who you descend from, and how does history show up in your work particularly?
Okay. Thank you, Sadada, for the prompt. I'll start by defining for me what colonialism is. So colonialism, in my opinion, is the erasure of Native and Indigenous people. It is the oppression of one group, the European group of people that came to this country, went to this land, looking to relieve themselves or flee from their own oppression by oppressing those who they came in contact with. I have notes because those questions are very dense and I want to stay on topic. I would say that current forms of colonialism include the dismissal of Native people, and I have a very recent experience that happened to me here actually at the museum on Monday. So I'm going to pull that into this conversation to kind of, again, bring us back to the contemporary time and 2019 and what it is to be an Indigenous person here. I was sitting at the United American Indians of New England table, providing information for Indigenous Peoples Day, converting Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day here statewide in Massachusetts. And while I'm sitting there, I have two white men come up to me and ask me, well, what's wrong with Columbus? So of course, that's a charged question, especially on Indigenous Peoples Day and in the context of a celebration here at the museum. And so I did proceed to explain to him, well, he was a murderer and et cetera, going on about Columbus. And then the gentleman says to me, well, why does it have to be Indigenous Peoples Day? Why can't we have Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day? So now I can tell that they're trying to provoke me. And so I felt very uncomfortable. And I just told them that I didn't really want to engage further in the conversation. So one leaves, and then another one stands there and says, well, you don't look Native. You must be African. You look African to me. So you're not Native. Or if you're Native, you're only part Native. And so this was really shocking to me, especially here. It's 2019, it's Indigenous Peoples Day, we're trying to celebrate this, and yet here we are still erasing and policing Indigenous bodies and Indigenous people on their own land. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm of the Massachusetts tribe at Punkapog. There's nowhere for me to go. I'm here, I'm home, and yet I'm still being policed or being asked to prove who I am and what my lineage is. So I think that for me, colonialism is something that's really a way that we function and a way that people are interacting with one another. And it's also very damaging to all of us to participate and to continue to, again, police people in spaces where we're all just trying to be our authentic selves. So I would start by just saying that.
I struggled with that growing up. So at one point, I decided that I would dissect what colonialism is. So I found out, I just studied it, and I realized that there's techniques that go into colonization. And these techniques can be taken anywhere in the world, and they work the same way. They started from the encomiendas, who are Spanish people, in the, I forgot what they're called, but the techniques are physically hurt the people. The next is once you physically hurt them through violence, then you enslave them and have them work for you so that everything that they have becomes yours. The next technique is to put a religion on them. If they are not whatever religion you are, then they are not considered human. So since they're not considered human, then they are able to oppress, manipulate, kill. They take all the rights from them. So, and then other techniques are do not let the people, the indigenous people, or whoever the conquerors are conquering, do not let them use their name, do not let them use their language, do not let them meet together. And you put all these techniques together, and that destroys a culture. And another technique is to take from the land. We develop our culture. All cultures develop through the homeland where we live. We have predictable seasons, predictable dates. The land tells us what's going to happen. Winter's going to happen, summer's going to happen, and through these seasons, we realize, we do certain things, and that's how we build our traditions. And that's how we feel safe. Our traditions make us feel safe because we know every year we're going to have this certain holiday. Every year we're going to have this certain Thanksgiving. For us Native Americans, we had a Thanksgiving for every season. We had 13 Thanksgivings throughout the year. So these are what build our culture and our traditions, and this was what made us feel safe. So through colonization techniques, you take the land out from the people. Right there, they don't feel safe. You're destroying their culture. Language is in the land because where we moved, wherever we went to, the language told us where we were going. We're going to the place of the red fish. We're going to the place where we rest. We're going to the place of the cousins. So colonization techniques will destroy a people from within their culture, and it will perpetuate through generations after generation after generation if you don't put a halt to it. So I thought the way to put a halt to it is to teach the techniques. And I saw these techniques working so well on the tribes that, I'm Wampanoag, Narragansett, Wampagansett. I saw it working on the Narragansetts. I saw it working on the Wampanoags, where people, they didn't feel whole. They attacked themselves from within. There was such a high percentage of suicide. And then from not loving oneself from within, it went out into the family, into the community, and it was coming back and forth. And so at one point I just said, I asked the National Museum of the American Indian, please give me a grant so I can teach the techniques of colonization to the youngest so that they will recognize them and live the opposite. So that's my idea of colonization. I didn't really know it when I was young, so I didn't even know that those techniques were affecting me. But as I got older, I realized they are. So, and another thing for I try to step back from colonization techniques and not be sitting right inside of them because I have Spanish ancestry. And those techniques came from the encomiendas who were Spanish. So I can feel, like I was at a unity conference this weekend, and I was saying it was their ancestors who harmed our ancestors. We are not harming each other now, but what we don't realize is that the social construction of the society and in capitalism still oppresses. It still oppresses wherever it needs to oppress to keep the status quo at the same place in capitalism. And I'll talk about that later. So I think I answered the question.
Thank you, Deb.
And also, I just want to piggyback just one little thing. I mean, look what's happening in the southern border. It's the same, these techniques that you're talking about, and this colonization that we live in, we are still perpetuating it. Even though we have the language and the terminology and the education to know that it's wrong, we're still participating in it. So I just want to.
I think it was Dr. King that first said something, I can't remember the quote exactly, but something like evil and bad things persist and perpetuate when good people do nothing. And so how can we continue to have Columbus Day in this country? I mean, you guys in this city are dealing with the Faneuil Hall issue. How can we continue to have a building named after someone who did so much damage? And so when people of color walk past that building or drive past their building or go into that building, they're being re-injured every single day. We were just talking about your trip to Washington, D.C. and getting off a bus and seeing crowds of people walk around with redskins shirts and hats on. Re-entry, how do we allow that to continue? When will it stop? I think you both answered the question about colonialism really well. I have a friend whose name is Bernie Dimchuk. He's an African-American historian, teaches at Howard University. This white guy who seems to be a walking encyclopedia of African-American history in this country. He's also the president of Ben's Chili Bowl, if you guys know the historic Ben's Chili Bowl in D.C. He calls colonialism and gentrification, he calls it swagger jacking. He says that it is people coming into a place that they don't belong or that isn't theirs and taking it and oppressing it or claiming it as their own. They're jacking our swag. We have to stop that. It's hard as the leader of an organization, if you're a person of color, because we were talking about this earlier, that often you're asked to solve the problems that you didn't create. And I wrestle with this every single day. I'm in a position of power at my organization. I don't have ultimate power because most of my board is white, and they have hired me and they can fire me. So I don't have ultimate power, but I do have power. And every single day, emails and phone calls and meetings where people are asking me to fix a problem that I didn't create. And so often whose job is it to fix the problem that was created in this country? I wrestle with those kind of things every day. I think that's all I want to say.
Before we shift to the next segment, is there anything that you want to say more about how these themes of colonialism, like concretely show up in your work or influence your work, limit your work?
Sure. As a theater professional, I grew up, my first profession was in the dance world. And so here I am, this little black kid from lower Northwest DC, taking ballet every day. It's not my dance form, not my ancestors' dance form, but that was what I had to do to work towards this career in theater. And then I studied trumpet. I went to school as a music major, and all the trumpet I studied was classical trumpet. But who's to say what's classical? When you go and study theater in college and you're studying acting, almost every single acting technique, with the exception of Uta Hagen that we talked about earlier, is white male, European. And so when I pick up August Wilson for the first time, I'm lost. I know the people, but I don't know how to act the work, because every technique I learned came from white European males. We were having a really great season planning discussion. So when you work in theater, you plan your season about a year and a half in advance. And so we were having a season planning discussion, and the bulk of my patronage is older white folk who have a very specific kind of theater they like. And as the black leader of this theater, I want to bring in stories about other cultures. But the fear that people won't show up to see that is there. And I have a staff of people I have to make sure I can pay them and take care of them. And so how do you balance that? How do you balance all the plays by Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller and only a handful of plays by black playwrights or female playwrights or playwrights who are Latinx or Asian, and get a season that is fiscally viable? So it shows up every single day at my job,
Deb or Jenny, you want to take this briefly?
So I'll go well. So the work that I'm creating and how colonialism kind of sits in that is that I'm trying to eradicate it from the inside out through education. So those of you that may or may not know, reading the program, I'm also an educator. And so I think that the power is really in the knowledge. I recently just created a show called Hot Water Over Raised Fists. And within that show, we're looking at the indigenous perspective of water, the injustice that happened at Standing Rock. But not only that, we're talking about not just Dakota Access Pipeline, but all the other pipelines that are in Canada. but that we don't talk about because it's not here in the United States. We also brought up issues about the hydro dams that they're creating in the Northeast. If we don't know that these things exist, then we don't know that there's even a problem. Talking about the privatization of water in Rhode Island, that's another fight that Indigenous people are struggling with and struggling against, happening right now in 2019. And I think that if we don't know that these things are even happening because we're too busy living in this capitalist society where your value is only on what you can produce, and we all have bills, and we all have places that we need to be, and families that we need to be taken care of. If we don't really have the opportunity to educate ourselves, how are we going to even know that there's an issue or there's a problem? So through my work, I'm really trying to bump up against this colonialism and bump up against the destruction of Indigenous lands, and also support and give rise to the people that are doing the work. And a lot of times the people that are doing the work are the Indigenous people, and those are also the people that are not getting covered, right? The media is not going to these areas where the hydro dams are. They're not going to these meetings in Rhode Island that they're having against the privatization of water. And so how can I, as an artist, begin to bring some of that information to my audience? Because I know that most of my audience are white people. I live here in the city of Boston. The people that dance with me often are white people, so their families and friends come. So it's really an opportunity for me to bump up against, colonialism through education, and really try to empower people with that knowledge so that they can either choose to do something or not choose to do something. But once you know and you choose not to do something, I think that it really is kind of an indication of where you stand. So that's, I think, how my work is really intersecting there.
You got it, Deb?
The way that I deal with colonization and oppression and how I work through my art is, one, I love Debbie, and I tell Debbie, you can do whatever you want. Just get there and paint your heart out. So I went to art school, and I was taught that Europeans paint themselves, and they paint the beauty of Europe. Well, I couldn't relate to that, to the history of Europe, because I don't have many ancestors that came from there. So one day I woke up and I said, I'm going to paint Native people. I'm going to paint the Eastern Woodland Native people, because we are here. And I mean, maybe generations ago they would have killed me for this, but right now, in this present time, I'm not going to be killed for painting pictures of my cousins, my mother, my father, my aunts, the little kids that are at the powwow that are beautiful. So what I did was I found the beauty of my people, and I made art from it. And with that art, I underlined social injustice, inequities. I wrote about those. Even like the last mural that I did, I actually write the words right in the art. Like, this is what I'm trying to communicate. But another point that I wanted to make is that a lot of us Indigenous people are in the marginalized spaces in the world. We're not the hierarchy. We're not the people running the world. But I realized that when my kids were going to school, they weren't oppressed for their color. They were oppressed for their way of life. Because my kids were A students, and there were times when they would come home and say, Mom, the kids that are in the corners that are saying, this is what we're going to do to go to college, and they weren't Indian. The teachers would say, come up to them and tell them, oh yeah, you should go to this college, you should go to that college. My daughter, if there was a bunch of Indians in the corridor, they got detention. They weren't told. And then my daughter asked, she wanted to go to Harvard, had come to interview her, and she went to see her, her guidance counselor, and he took her in his office and screamed at her for an hour that she had no right to eat to be even thinking about going to college. And he'd see her in the corridor and yell at her, you know, how do you think that your family would afford that? How dare you even think that you could go to college? So from these situations, I realized that in order to be part of this, you know, hierarchy, the ruling part of society, you have to act like them. You have to fake like you're, you know, you have to fake that you're going to be like, you want to be part of this capitalistic society, even when you have a beautiful way of life. But those are the keys that open the door to be able to get to spaces where you have the right to say, I have the right to say I don't agree with this. Because what society does, they keep information from us people in the marginalized societies, and they do whatever they want so that they can continue being on the top. So if we act like them and get into their spaces where they're making these decisions, you know, you want to be at the table where the decisions are being made that can harm you. Like if somebody's moving into your homeland and they're going to destroy your water and your land, and you want to be at that table to say, no, we're going to enact some laws, and you can grab a bunch of people, you know, because crowdsourcing, the more people that speak about something, the more power you have. So what we need to do is get into these places. So we need the right to know what's going on first, and we need to, you know, open doors so we can be in places where decisions are being made instead of staying on the outsides of society and saying, oh, we can't do anything about it. You can.
I wanted to quickly add, the other way I've been sort of combating colonialism in my organizations is, you know, often, especially in U.S. theater, if a play is about a marginalized person or has a marginalized character in it, the whole play becomes about the thing that has been decided about, the thing that makes that person marginalized. And so, you know, as a black gay man, I have other contributions to society, and I want to see those stories. And sometimes that's hard because especially plays that are written by white folk about marginalized people, it just becomes about that thing. Yesterday, I was sitting in Speak Easy's production of Choir Boy. Brilliant production, but to see my story, black gay man who sang in the choir and went to an all-boy private school up on stage was tremendous for me. It was tremendous. And to see it in a way that was a celebration and still had deeply moving and dramatic parts to it, it was just tremendous. One of the plays I commissioned and wrote at my old theater, which happened to be a children's theater, and I love that because I get to influence the minds of children before others do. And so this play it was adapted from a little book called Mirandy and Brother Wind. Anyone know that book? Written by Patricia McKissick. Takes place in 1906 in a small rural town in South Carolina during the annual cakewalk dance. And Mirandy, who's 10 years old, wants to win the annual cakewalk dance because you win a cake. I mean, who doesn't want to win cake? And she sets out to find the best partner. And she rejects her friend because her friend is clumsy. And she hears about the legend of Brother Wind, who's a fictional character. He's the wind, and he kicks up his heels, and he can swirl and spin. And she hears that if you capture Brother Wind, you can make him do your bidding. And so she sets off to find and capture Brother Wind because he would be the best dance partner for her. And she captures him, and she finds out that he's so sad being enslaved. And so this little black girl learns about enslavement while she's trying to win this competition to win a cake. So what I loved about that play was that the given circumstances were about enslavement and black and white issues, but the story was about the celebration of this major cultural contribution, which is the cakewalk, which was the beginning of so many dances, popular dances that happened after that. And so kids could come in and see that story, see a community of people of color that is being uplifted, and hear the music and see the dances and see how they contributed to the society. You know, it upsets me when we talk about some people in this country don't want to let Mexicans into America, even though Mexico is part of America. But they enjoy Taco Tuesdays, right? They enjoy the contributions that people of color have brought to this country, but they don't want to allow us in. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that, and thank you for bringing into the conversation, and as you are willing and as you feel appropriate, to also reflect on enslavement as well. But we're going to move to the impact on the artist and your art, the impact that this heinous history has on either you, the artist, and or the artist, or your art that you produce. And you've started to talk about that a little bit, but I want us to dive a little deeper in that. And so I'm going to give us another quote to kind of reflect on. In the artist struggle for integrity, St. James Baldwin, and I do like to refer to him as a saint, discusses quite candidly the labor that artists, specifically, quote, Negro artists, must do to produce work of integrity. In the final movement of this symphonic lecture, he declares, quote, "The time has come, it seems to me, to recognize that the frameworks in which we operate weigh on us too heavily to be borne, and it is about to kill us. It is time to ask very hard questions and to take very rude positions at no matter what cost." So artists, I'd like you to consider some hard questions that are in the vein of integrity, the impact of this heinous history on your art and you as an artist, and take as rude of a position that you need to.
This one is tough. This one is tough because I'm still processing enslavement, right? I'm still processing it because I feel like I am also still part of the enslaved population, right? If anyone participates in this capitalist, settler colonial society, we are enslaved to the system. And so in my work, I'm trying to negotiate still, which I think that maybe I shouldn't, you know, leaning on the words of Mr. Baldwin. I admire and aspire to be a little bit more rude in my art making. But I'm really trying to negotiate where that lands for me. Where does my liberation land in the context of my work? I want my work to be educational. I want my work to be accessible, because I think that at this point, again, education is going to be the key. Through my perspective, education is really going to be the key for us to be able to combat a lot of the issues that we're facing. But how can I do that in a way that is rude and authentic to the truth of what has happened to enslaved people and what has happened to Native people, but also is going to be enticing to those that may have descended from the enslavers, to want to come to the table and have a conversation, to want to come to the table and be educated, to want to come to the table and be uncomfortable. Because I think that a lot of the time we're spent, those of us here up on the panel, some of us in the audience, we're always asked to hold the space for others' discomfort. But when will our discomfort be held? When will people be able to come and meet us where we're at, so that we can start to relieve some of that and maybe move past some of the heinous histories that we faced? So I don't know exactly where I'm going to end up. I am still a very young artist. I'm only 35. I have a lot more life and experience to give to my art making. But in that process, I am really trying to figure out, how do I liberate myself in a way that's going to be authentic to me and also be inviting to those who might be on the other side of my experience.
Nice. The way that I am trying to bring my art to a place where it can speak for a whole community, a whole, group of people, a whole nation, is I'm looking into my ancestors, and I'm finding the beauty that they lived in their lives. So, like I was saying before, I think in order for us to make a difference, like Jane Fonda is right now, you know, because she has that celebrity, people hear her. I'm trying to put my art in a place where it isn't left in a corner. It has so much content that people have to turn their heads and say, wow, she's communicating something. So what happened with me, I did a lot of paintings like that said what was happening with, you know, my ancestors. And at one point, my daughter said to me, I did a, what do you call it, capstone for my master's in cultural sustainability, and I was going on 500 pages, and my first reader said, you only had to do 100. And I said, but I have 500 more in me. So then I said, what the heck, I'll publish it as a book. So I edited it to a book. And then I was so afraid to put the book out because will my children get the repercussions because I'm saying everything about my ancestors? And my daughter said to me, Mom, please publish it. Your art is muted and you need to give it a voice. So that's where I wrote this book, Finding Balance. And it tells about, you know, enslavement and indenturedness, murder, land wrestling. But what I like to do is grasp the most positive stories and then get people's attention with the positive stories and then pull them in and tell them what is the truth, the truth. Because, you know, when I was growing up, being a Wampanoag, they said that I didn't exist, so that was not, I grew up, the first thing I knew was not the truth. So I thought it was time for this country to know the truth. You know, they have the colonial version of what happened here on these lands. Now they have the Native American version of what happened here on this land and all the land that was wrested. But for me, I have an ancestor named Paul Cuffey, who his mother was Wampanoag, his father was African. And his father, I mean, what Paul Cuffey did was he built ships and he brought the African slaves back to Sierra Leone. And I mean, he's my champion. So I look for grants where I can, you know, highlight what he did and show, you know, the strength and resilience of my ancestors who had to endure such horrific lives. So my next piece of art is going to be about Paul Cuffey. Then I have another ancestor named Freeman Slocum who married a Wampanoag from Anawan's granddaughter. And I'm yet to show his life. That I want to show every piece of beauty in his soul. And that's what I want to highlight in my art. And I also want it to be in places where it can reach large audiences. Oh, and the one last thing I wanted to say that I didn't say last time too, I wanted to do all this, keeping the authenticity and the integrity of my way of life. I don't want to become part of the machine of capitalism, which to me, that's where I have the difficulty is like, where do you make the line? Where am I becoming a capitalist or am I staying? So I like to get in there, but then I like to go back to the simple ways of life of a Native person where we are reciprocal to the land, where we take care of the land, where capitalism doesn't take care of the land. So I want my art to be able to be in places where I can talk about indigenous people and how we have, you know, idealism that, you know, it would be great to be able to take care of yourself financially, but we have to enact cultural policies and you know, public policies that say that these large capitalist corporations cannot destroy our homelands when they come in. So we have to be together. You know, the indigenous people, the people that live in communities, we're all together as one, as a whole. So that's how you make differences as large groups and say, we will not allow you to come in here. That's what I just did with the Providence Preservation Society mural. A corporation wanted to come in and put a building on this land that was so historically rich. I mean, Roger Williams lived there, Benjamin Church lived there, the Indians. It was a place called Weybosset where all 4 tribes would meet, and that's where they would go the different directions. And a corporation was just going to put up a building and leave no access for people. And so with enough people saying, no, we will not allow this, they're not putting up the building. The land has become an indigenous garden, and you know, people have access to that land, and that will bring in more cultural tourism to that area than a corporation putting up a hotel. So my name is Babylon. Well, I was born Babylon Brook, then I went into Talking Water, more dignified. So stop that.
I have this weird dream that I call utopia, where the idea of race as has been defined in this country, when did it start, 1670 or something like that, where it's flipped, and it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. I have this fear of homogenization. We all become one person. I want to maintain my own cultural identity, but when invited, experience your culture in a positive way. I think we're seeing little glimmers of it. I have a lot of wealthy white friends, women, who can sing every single word of Hamilton. I want to see more of that. You know what I mean? Where she can still stay who she is, but experience other people's culture. That's part of my utopia. But one of the ways I also battle it, I think there's this unconscious bias, and we all need to be aware of our unconscious bias. And then there is bias that is, I think, a good thing. Bias that allows us to make room for people that have been marginalized. And I know in my own world, in my own theater world, I have a lot of bias for people of color. I want to do stories. I will do stories. I have done stories about people of color, written by people of color, for people of color. And I've had to create policies around that to help people with their bias. You know, my last theater, and actually at New Rep, we have a 50% people of color rule. So in our productions, for the season, 50% of the artists that work in the productions have to be people of color. And that's a starting place. Hopefully we'll exceed that. But it helps people to have a benchmark and a place to celebrate. And it makes them work harder, because now it's part of their job and part of their deliverables, right? That's kind of radical universalism. That's kind of where the affirmative action world came from, where you have to work harder to make sure there's room for people of color. So I'm continuing to do that and explore different ways where policy can have an equity, diversity, inclusion lens. And I think all policy have to have that, right? Policies exist on a bell curve to take care of most people, but on the ends of the bell curve, people are getting screwed, right? And the problem in this country is that people that always get screwed, marginalized people, get screwed even more by these policies. So how do we create policies where people that are getting screwed are taken care of the most, and those that have a means to get it in another way can get it another way, right? We have to do more of that. That's how we can eradicate racism. That's how we can eradicate the perpetuation of colonialism. We have to look at policies. And we have to make sure that people of color are in the creation of policies. You look at the photo of the Congressional Committee on Women's Reproductive Issues. It's all white men making laws about your bodies. What will happen when there are women with women in the room, with women who are people of color in the room? What would happen to those policies? So, anyway, I could also babble on for a while.
Well, I love that. Thank you. You all have been super, super generous. And unfortunately, time has not been generous with us. And that's okay, because this is the beginning. I hope it's the beginning for all of you all. So I'm going to end us kind of with a truncation of what I planned for us to talk about in the last segment, because I think it's very important for you to actively bring your ancestors into the space and actively bring your descendants into the space. And I want you to do that by just thinking about something you feel deep gratitude or deep responsibility for in terms of the ancestors in which you come. African enslaved, Black, African, indigenous of these lands, European even, but so just one thing. And then in terms of your descendants, one thing you want them to remember.
I have deep gratitude for being on the planet at this time, because I feel like we're in the midst of a second civil rights movement. And so I think my ancestors want me to live in that and embrace that and spread this word and continue to educate myself and continue to convince others to educate themselves, because this all starts with education. I'm super grateful for that, and I hope that this moment will be marked in the history books. I think what's happening in the political world is bringing all the rest of the iceberg that's under the surface up to the surface. And you know, I have this wonderful, beautiful kid who is diverse from me. He's Vietnamese. I love exploring his culture with him. I tell him when he went to college, I told him, I said, fix the world. Sorry we broke it. Your problem, fix it. It's not his problem. It's our problem to make it better for him. But I want to leave him with a better world.
Thank you. Deb, and then, or Jen, and then Deb, however you want.
I think that for me, I am grateful for the space that my ancestors have held. I'm grateful that we haven't been erased, although colonization has tried to do that. I'm grateful that my parents are educated people that were able to show me the light and show me that not what I'm learning in school about Native people and how they all went west and like either died or got killed. No, that we're still here. So I'm grateful for their example. And I hope that for my descendants, that's actually part of the reason why over the past 2 years I've really shifted my practice and my focus of my art making. I recently got married, and the idea of having children has really weighed heavily on me, because I don't want my children to have to wait until they're 30 plus to figure out where the holes are in their lives. So that's really kind of given me a lot of the a lot of the motivation to really make sure that my work is authentic and make sure that my work is digging deep. And so I hope that they will understand that they are survivors of colonization and that we are thrivers, and that it is up to all of us to continue to tell the narrative that we know is true to us, even when those that may have more of a higher voice try to erase us and train us to think differently.
Thank you. And Deb, you can finish.
Okay. I have so much to say on this answer. I know that I'm a bridge. I know that anybody that lives is a bridge. We're a bridge from our ancestors to our descendants. I studied each ancestor that I had from my mother's side, and each and every one of them, there was so much beauty in their being. I come from King Philip's sister. I come from Massasoit. I come from Awangshaks. I come from Weedamo. I come from Sassacus. I mean, these are people that fought with all their being to hold on to this homeland. And then I have a grandfather who died because he was told that if he didn't if they didn't act like Christians, then they would kill them. So I thank my ancestors that protected us, that protected, they wouldn't leave this one area. It's hard for me to talk over these people.
Very hard.
I apologize. The timing was that we would end when they ended, but just continue. I think you can be heard.
Well, where my mother grew up, we weren't able to say who we were, or they weren't able to meet, or they would be killed. So one of the things that they would say is, don't tell anybody who you are because you're putting the whole tribe in jeopardy. Because once they know where we are, then they're going to know that more than 4 of us are there, and then we're going to be killed. So my grandmother started a church, and that's what a lot of Native people did. They would do churches and do the Native ways within the church. Well, my grandfather built this church right here that's on the front of my book, and he died of pneumonia. Well, building that, trying to get it up on time, my uncle survived. He had pneumonia too. I am just so grateful for what he did. I had no idea that he had taken a wooden box, he was a carpenter, and he put every piece of genealogy that there ever was of our family, he put it in that book, in that chest. And that chest was hidden away since like 1929, and I received it from the church in 2005. So like 100 years had gone by, and he was protecting our genealogy with that book. And my uncle gave everything to the church. So when I asked the church, can you give me pictures, they gave me that wooden chest. That's how I was able to write this story, because that colonization had made sure that they did everything to obscure our history so we would not claim who we were. We would not know all the horrific things that were done to our ancestors, or the land where we were buried. They didn't want us to know anything. My grandfather kept it all in a wooden chest. So that is one person that I treasure, the fact that he was my grandfather. I never got to meet him, but I know that these ancestors, with our philosophy, our way of life, you take care of the next 7 generations. My brother, who has like 16 grandchildren, he said to me when I had my first grandchild, I was like, oh, thank goodness. He said, how do you feel? I said, I see all my relations in her eyes. And the beauty of the resilience, everything that people did that made me me, I know I'm a bridge to the ones that are coming in the next 7 generations. What I did for their healing is I took the obscurity away. They don't have to say, who am I? Where am I? Why did this happen to me? They can look in this book and say, oh, that's what happened. Oh, that's why I don't know this, and that's why these people act this way. They can move on from that, what colonization tried to destroy us. They can move on to it. Okay, they did try to destroy us, but they didn't. So now we grow and make something better. Aho.
Thank you. I want to thank you all. Thank you for doing your labor of listening.